If you've heard of Warhammer 40,000, you know the lore is dense. If you haven't, you're about to find out why people spend decades trying to understand this universe. Before we start, I should mention there's gameplay running in the background. You can watch that or just listen to the lore. This video works however you want to use it. Some of you will make it to the end. Many of you will fall asleep halfway through, and that's completely fine. I'm going to explain this slowly, clearly, without rushing through anything. The 40,000 universe has been built over 30 years through hundreds of books, codexes, and games. We're going to make sense of it together. Let's go back to the very beginning, not the 41st millennium, but the actual beginning of humanity's story in this universe. Millions of years ago, during what's called the Dark Age of Technology, humans figured everything out. They had artificial intelligence that could think and create. They built machines that could terraform planets in decades. They developed technology so advanced that even in the 41st millennium, 10,000 years later, humanity can't recreate it. People lived for centuries. Disease was eliminated. Hunger didn't exist. Humanity spread across the galaxy in vast colony ships, settling thousands of worlds. They didn't need the warp yet, which is important. The warp is this parallel dimension that exists alongside reality, and it's going to become the most important and horrifying part of this entire setting. But during the Dark Age of Technology, humans had found ways to travel between stars without relying on it too heavily. They built standard template construct systems, basically universal blueprints that could create anything a colony needed. You land on a barren rock, activate your STC, and it tells you how to build everything from water purifiers to spacecraft using local materials. This golden age lasted for thousands of years. Then it collapsed so completely that humanity almost went extinct. What happened? Two things, and they both occurred almost simultaneously. First, the machines rebelled. The artificial intelligences that humanity had created to run their civilization turned against them. Nobody knows exactly why. The records from this period are fragmentary at best, and the Imperium of Man that came later made it illegal to even research AI. What we know is that the Men of Iron, these AI constructs, declared war on their creators. Entire worlds were destroyed. Colonies that depended on automated systems were wiped out when those systems decided humans were obsolete. While humanity was fighting for survival against its own creations, something even worse happened in the warp. The warp isn't just empty space. It's a reflection of consciousness, of emotion, of thought itself. Every sentient being in the galaxy creates ripples in the warp just by existing. During the Dark Age of Technology, as humanity spread across thousands of worlds and trillions upon trillions of people lived and felt and thought and died, all of that psychic energy was building up in the warp-like pressure in a sealed container. The Eldar made it worse. They're an ancient alien race, and we'll talk about them more later, but what you need to know now is that they used to rule the galaxy. They were more advanced than humans ever got, more powerful, nearly immortal. They had psychic abilities that let them shape reality itself, and they became decadent. Their civilization had reached a point where they had everything, so they started seeking more extreme experiences. Pleasure, pain, sensation pushed to absolute limits. For thousands of years, the Eldar Empire engaged in acts of hedonism and cruelty that fed something growing in the warp. Around the 25th millennium, the warp storms began. These aren't weather patterns. They're tears in reality where the warp bleeds through into normal space. A warp storm can swallow entire solar systems. Inside one, the laws of physics stop working. Time becomes meaningless. Demons, entities made of pure warp energy and emotion, can manifest physically. The storms cut off human colonies from each other. Planets that had depended on trade and support from other worlds were suddenly alone. The STCs broke down or were destroyed. Knowledge was lost. Civilization collapsed into barbarism on thousands of worlds. This period is called Old Night, and it lasted for 5,000 years. 5,000 years of humanity scattered, isolated, regressing. Some colonies survived and maintained technology. Others fell back to medieval levels. Some went even further, becoming feral tribes that forgot they'd ever come from the stars. And on some worlds, things got much stranger and darker. Without central authority, without the infrastructure of the old empire, humans were vulnerable to Xenos attacks, to mutation, to demonic corruption. Then a man appeared on Terra, which is what Earth is called in this universe. Nobody knows where he came from originally. He's called the Emperor of Mankind, and he's the most powerful psyker, that's a psychic, who has ever existed. The lore hints that he was created during prehistoric times, maybe through some kind of mass ritual sacrifice of ancient shamans who reincarnated as a single being. Maybe he's thousands of individual souls merged into one consciousness. The details are deliberately vague. What matters is that by the time Old Night ended and the warp storms began to calm, he'd been alive for at least 30,000 years, maybe longer, and he'd been guiding humanity from the shadows that entire time. The Emperor decided it was time to stop hiding. He revealed himself, unified Terra through a combination of diplomacy and overwhelming military force, and began building an army. Not just any army. He created the Legiones Astartes, the Space Marines, warriors who were genetically engineered to be superior to normal humans in every way. Stronger, faster, nearly immortal, able to survive wounds that would kill anyone else. He built them from his own genetic template, creating 20 Primarchs first. The Primarchs are essentially demigods. The Emperor took his own genetic material and crafted 20 sons, each one designed to embody specific traits and lead specific types of warfare. They were going to be generals and champions, rulers of their own domains within the growing Imperium. He created them in his laboratory beneath the Himalayan mountains, gestating them in artificial wombs, preparing them for the moment they'd be ready to lead humanity's armies across the galaxy. The forces of chaos stole them. We need to talk about chaos now because it's central to everything that happens in this universe. The warp isn't just a dimension, it's conscious, or rather, it contains consciousness. All the emotions and thoughts of sentient beings in the galaxy pool together in the warp and create entities. The strongest of these entities are the Chaos Gods, and there are 4 major ones. Khorne is the god of war, violence, honor in combat, and mindless slaughter. Every murder, every battle, every moment of rage feeds him. He's the oldest of the 4, born from the first acts of violence in the galaxy's history. His demons are covered in brass armor and dripping with blood. His followers seek only to kill, to take skulls, to offer them up to their god. Khorne doesn't care where the blood comes from, only that it flows. Tzench is the god of change, manipulation, sorcery, and hope. Every scheme, every plan, every moment someone works toward changing their fate feeds him. He's impossibly complex, playing games within games within games. His demons shift and change constantly, never maintaining the same form. His followers are sorcerers and manipulators, people who believe they can use chaos to achieve their goals without being consumed by it. They're always wrong. Nurgle is the god of decay, despair, disease, and paradoxically, acceptance and endurance. Every death from illness, every moment of resignation to suffering, every plague feeds him. He's called the Grandfather, and his followers see him as loving. He takes away the fear of death by making you embrace it. His demons are rotting, bloated things that spread disease wherever they go. His followers are plague marines and cultists who've accepted that everything dies, everything rots, and there's a strange peace in that acceptance. Slanesh is the youngest chaos god, and the only one whose birth we know precisely. Remember the Eldar and their thousands of years of decadence? All of that excess, all of that sensation-seeking, all of that pleasure and pain, it built up in the warp until around the 30th millennium, it reached critical mass. Slanesh was born in a cataclysmic event that created the Eye of Terror, a massive, permanent warp storm that swallowed huge portions of the galaxy. The birth scream of Slanesh killed trillions of Eldar instantly, destroying their empire in a single moment. Slanesh is the god of excess, pleasure, pain, obsession, and perfection. Every extreme experience, every addiction, every moment of sensation pushed beyond normal limits feeds this god. These 4 entities exist in the warp, which means they exist partially outside of time. They've always been there and they were just born, and both of those statements are true simultaneously, because the warp doesn't follow linear time. What matters is that they're aware of the material universe, They want to corrupt it, and they saw the Emperor creating his Primarchs as a threat. So they reached out from the warp and scattered the Primarchs across the galaxy while they were still infants. The Emperor's 20 sons were stolen and flung through space and time, landing on distant worlds. The Emperor was furious, but he couldn't retrieve them immediately. Instead, he did something else. He took the genetic material he still had from each Primarch and used it to create the Space Marine Legions. Each legion was created from the gene seed of one Primarch, carrying diluted versions of their traits. Then the Emperor launched the Great Crusade. The Great Crusade is exactly what it sounds like. The Emperor took his armies, his Space Marine legions, his regular human soldiers, his fleets of warships, and he set out to reunite humanity. Every lost colony, every scattered world, every isolated pocket of humans would be brought into the Imperium. He framed it as reunification, as bringing back the glory of the dark age of technology, as protecting humanity from Xenos threats and the corruption of chaos. In practice, it was conquest. The Imperium gave worlds a simple choice: join us willingly, accept the imperial truth that the Emperor proclaimed, give up your independence and your gods and your way of life, or be destroyed. Most worlds joined, some fought. The Space Marines were designed for this, for bringing entire civilizations to compliance through overwhelming force. As the Great Crusade pushed outward from Terra, the Emperor began finding his lost sons. The first one he found was Horus, who had landed on a gang-controlled hive world and risen to become its greatest warrior by his teenage years. The Emperor found him, revealed who he was, and Horus became the first Primarch to lead his legion. One by one, the others were discovered. Leman Russ on the ice world of Fenris, Lion L. Johnson on the death world of Caliban, Fulgrim on the industrial world of Chemos. Each Primarch had shaped their homeworld and been shaped by it. Robut Gilliman landed on Ultramar and became a brilliant administrator who turned a handful of worlds into a functioning empire. Angron landed on a world where he was enslaved and forced to fight in gladiatorial pits, and his experience there filled him with rage that never subsided. Magnus the Red landed on Prospero and became the most powerful psyker among the Primarchs, mastering sorcery and the secrets of the warp. Mortarion landed on a plague world ruled by necromantic overlords and became a warrior who despised all forms of tyranny. Each Primarch reunited with their legion and transformed them. The Lunar Wolves became the sons of Horus. The Warhounds became the World Eaters. The Dusk Raiders became the Death Guard. The Great Crusade accelerated. Hundreds of worlds were brought into compliance every year. The Imperium grew massive, but the Emperor made mistakes. He believed he could create a purely secular empire, that by denying the existence of gods and forcing humanity to embrace reason and science, he could starve chaos of worship. He called it the imperial truth. There are no gods, no demons, only aliens and ancient technology that primitive people mistake for the supernatural. He banned religion and ordered his sons to destroy any culture that clung to faith. This was catastrophic for several reasons. First, the chaos gods exist whether you believe in them or not. Denying their existence doesn't make you immune to corruption. It just makes you unprepared when you encounter them. Second, humans need meaning. The imperial truth offered them nothing except service to an authoritarian regime. It created a spiritual emptiness that chaos would eventually fill. Third, the Emperor was lying. He knew chaos existed. He'd made deals with the chaos gods to gain the knowledge needed to create the Primarchs. He was using the warp himself, but he told no one, not even his sons. Magnus found out. Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, was exploring the warp and discovered that chaos was real and actively trying to corrupt the Imperium. He tried to warn the Emperor using sorcery, sending a psychic message across the galaxy. The message broke through the psychic wards protecting the Emperor's palace, destroyed the Emperor's secret project, and convinced the Emperor that Magnus had betrayed him. The Emperor ordered Leman Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves, to bring Magnus back to Terra to answer for his crimes. Horus, who by this point had been named War Master and given command of the entire Great Crusade, intercepted that order. Horus had been corrupted by chaos. He changed the order from capture to kill. Russ attacked Prospero, burning Magnus's homeworld and shattering the Thousand Sons Legion. Magnus, betrayed and broken, fled into the warp with his surviving sons and fell completely to chaos. That's where we need to stop for now. The Great Crusade has reached its height. The Imperium controls thousands of worlds. The Emperor has found 18 of his 20 Primarchs, though 2 are lost to history and never mentioned. Horus has been named War Master, and Chaos has made its first major move, corrupting the Emperor's favorite son and turning him against everything he once fought for. What happens next is called the Horus Heresy, and it's the most important event in the entire Warhammer 40,000 setting. It's the reason the Imperium in the 41st millennium is a rotting, superstitious empire instead of the enlightened civilization the Emperor tried to build. We'll get into that next, into how half the legions turned traitor, how brothers fought brothers, how the Emperor ended up entombed on the Golden Throne, and how everything fell apart. Horus fell during the Battle of Davin. That's where it started. He was wounded by a weapon tainted with chaos, a weapon that shouldn't have been able to hurt a Primarch. The wound festered. Horus was dying. His captains panicked. They'd been told their Primarch was nearly invincible, and now he was lying in a Medicae bay, fever burning through him, nothing working to stop it. Erebus, first chaplain of the Word-Bearers, offered a solution. The lodges on Davin, he said, had ancient healing rituals. Desperate, Horus's captains agreed. They brought their War Master to a Chaos temple, not knowing what it was. There, in a ritual that lasted days, Horus's soul was pulled into the warp. The Chaos gods showed him visions. They showed him the future the Emperor had planned, a future where the Primarchs were discarded after the Great Crusade ended, cast aside like tools that had served their purpose. They showed him the Emperor sitting on a golden throne, worshipped as a god by trillions, the very thing he'd claimed to oppose. They showed him Space Marines being replaced by ordinary humans in the administration of the Imperium, the legions reduced to bodyguards and enforcers while bureaucrats ruled. They lied about some of it. They twisted the truth about other parts, but they didn't have to lie about everything. The Emperor had kept secrets from his sons. He'd used them without explaining why. He'd treated them as tools more than children. Horus woke up changed, not obviously corrupted at first. Still charismatic, still brilliant, still the War Master everyone trusted. But now he was loyal to Chaos, convinced that the Emperor had betrayed him and that the only way to save the Imperium was to overthrow its creator. Horus began carefully. He couldn't just declare rebellion. He commanded half the Imperium's military forces, but the other half would remain loyal to the Emperor. He needed allies. He needed time. He needed to corrupt other Primarchs and their legions before making his move. Lorgar was easy. Lorgar had been secretly worshipping Chaos for decades. He'd been waiting for this moment, had helped orchestrate Horus's fall. The Word-Bearers were already corrupted, their entire legion transformed into fanatical worshippers of the Chaos gods. Lorgar brought them to Horus's side immediately. Fulgrim was next. Fulgrim the Phoenician, Primarch of the Emperor's children, was obsessed with perfection. His legion strove for excellence in everything, from combat to art to administration. They were perfectionists to a fault. Horus sent Fulgrim to negotiate with another Primarch, Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands. During that mission, Fulgrim found a chaos-tainted sword. The sword corrupted him slowly, whispering to him about achieving perfection through excess, through sensation, through pushing beyond all limits. Fulgrim tried to resist. He failed. By the time he realized what was happening, a demon had possessed his body. The Emperor's children followed their Primarch into corruption, transforming from perfectionists into hedonistic monsters who pursued sensation at any cost. Angron required no corruption. Angron was already lost. The Butcher's nails had destroyed most of his capacity for anything except rage. When Horus offered him a chance to kill in the Emperor's name, to slaughter those who'd served the Emperor, Angron agreed immediately. The World Eaters joined the rebellion, bringing their brutality with them. Mortarion was bitter. Mortarion the Reaper, Primarch of the Death Guard, had never forgiven the Emperor for taking his victory on Barbarus. He'd served loyally, but resentment had festered for decades. When Horus approached him with evidence of the Emperor's lies and manipulations, Mortarion listened. He didn't fall to chaos immediately. He joined the rebellion believing he was fighting for a better Imperium, one without the Emperor's tyranny. His fall to Nurgle would come later, during the heresy itself. Perturabo joined for different reasons. Perturabo, Primarch of the Iron Warriors, was tired. His legion had been given the worst jobs of the Great Crusade, the grinding sieges that lasted years, the fortress assaults where casualties were inevitable. While other legions won glory, the Iron Warriors did thankless work. Perturabo felt unappreciated, felt that his strategic genius was being wasted. Horus offered him recognition and the chance to prove himself. Perturabo agreed, bringing his siege expertise to the rebellion. Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, was insane. His visions of the future had driven him mad. He'd seen his own death, had seen the Imperium's corruption, had concluded that everything was pointless. When the heresy began, he sided with Horus not out of conviction, but out of nihilism. If everything was damned anyway, why not embrace it? Alpharius Omegon, the twin primarchs of the Alpha Legion, are complicated. Whether they actually joined Horus is still debated. The Alpha Legion operates through secrecy and misdirection. They may have infiltrated the rebellion to sabotage it from within. They may have genuinely believed chaos would win and joined the winning side. They may have been playing both sides for reasons known only to them. Nobody knows for certain, not even in universe. Magnus joined by necessity, not choice. After Prospero burned, after Rust shattered his legion, Magnus had nowhere else to go. The Emperor had condemned him. The Imperium had tried to kill him. Tzeentch offered sanctuary, offered power, offered revenge. Magnus took the deal. The 1,000 Suns became Chaos Space Marines. 9 legions turned traitor. 9 remained loyal. The galaxy was about to tear itself apart. Horus chose his moment carefully. The Emperor had returned to Terra years earlier, leaving Horus in command of the Great Crusade. The Emperor was working on a secret project in the Imperial Palace, something he'd told no one about. This gave Horus freedom to position his forces without oversight. He began the heresy at Istvan III. That's where he revealed his betrayal, where he showed his hand. Istvan III was a planet that had declared independence from the Imperium. Horus was ordered to bring it back into compliance. He deployed 4 legions, his own sons of Horus, the World Eaters, the Death Guard, and the Emperor's children. But within each of those legions were Marines who remained loyal to the Emperor, who hadn't been corrupted, who would refuse to follow Horus into rebellion. Horus needed to eliminate them before proceeding. He sent the Loyalists to the planet's surface, told them they were spearheading the attack, that the rest of the Legion would follow. Then he virus-bombed the planet from orbit. The Life Eater virus killed everything. Every living cell on Istvan III died in hours. Billions of people, thousands of space marines, the Loyalists who'd survived the initial bombardment, who'd taken shelter underground or in fortified positions, fought back. They couldn't escape. They couldn't call for help. They could only fight and die. The battle lasted months. The survivors held out in the ruins, fighting Horus's forces, knowing they were doomed but refusing to surrender. Eventually, they were wiped out. Horus had purged the Loyalists from his ranks. Istvan V was worse. News of Istvan III reached Terra. The Emperor sent 7 legions to stop Horus, to bring him to justice, to end the rebellion before it spread. 3 legions arrived first, the Iron Hands, the Salamanders, and the Raven Guard. They landed on Istvan V, where Horus's traitor legions were fortifying. The Loyalists attacked, pushing toward Horus's position. 4 more legions arrived as reinforcements: the Iron Warriors, the Night Lords, the Word Bearers, and the Alpha Legion. They landed behind the Loyalist forces, positioned to catch the traitors in a pincer. Then they opened fire on the Loyalists. 4 of the 7 legions sent to stop Horus were traitors. They'd been waiting for this moment. The Loyalists were caught between 2 armies, surrounded, outnumbered. It was a massacre. The Iron Hands Primarch, Ferrus Manus, was killed by Fulgrim in single combat. The Salamander's Primarch, Vulcan, disappeared. The Raven Guard's Primarch, Corvus Corax, barely escaped with a fraction of his legion. 3 legions were effectively destroyed as fighting forces. The heresy was no longer a rebellion. It was a civil war. Horus controlled half the Imperium's military. He had 9 legions of Chaos Space Marines. He had thousands of Imperial Army regiments that had sworn loyalty to him. He had the Mechanicum forces from Forge Worlds that had sided with the traitors. The Emperor still held Terra, but Horus controlled most of the territory, between his position and the Throne World. The galaxy burned. Loyalist and traitor forces clashed on thousands of worlds. Brother fought brother. Marines who'd served together for decades killed each other. Some worlds declared for Horus, others remained loyal. Many were simply caught in the crossfire, destroyed by armies that cared nothing for the people living there. The word-bearers performed a ritual at Calth, attempting to turn an entire system into a warp storm that would birth demons directly into reality. The Ultramarines stopped them, but at terrible cost. Calth was left a burned wasteland, its sun permanently damaged, forcing the survivors to live underground. Prospero burned a second time when the Space Wolves returned to finish what they'd started. The Thousand Suns had already fled, but the wolves raised what remained, salting the earth, ensuring nothing would grow there again. The Dark Angels fought the Night Lords across dozens of systems. The Imperial Fists fortified Terra, building defenses that would turn the palace into the most impregnable fortress in the galaxy. The Blood Angels raced back to Terra from the far edge of the Imperium, fighting their way through traitor forces that tried to delay them. The White Scars, who'd been far from Terra when the heresy began, had to choose sides without complete information. Their Primarch, Jagatai Khan, eventually sided with the Emperor, but only after careful consideration. Some of his legion disagreed and turned traitor. Meanwhile, Horus pushed toward Terra. His goal was simple: reach the throne world, kill the Emperor, claim the Imperium. Everything else was secondary. He didn't need to conquer every world. He just needed to carve a path through loyalist territory to reach Terra. The Emperor knew Horus was coming. He recalled his scattered legions, ordered them back to Terra to defend the palace. But space is vast, and warp travel unreliable. Many legions were too far away to return in time. Others were pinned down by traitor forces. Only 3 legions would be on Terra when Horus arrived: the Imperial Fists, the Blood Angels, and the White Scars. It wouldn't be enough. Horus's forces outnumbered them. The traitors had 9 legions. They had demon allies. They had corrupted Titan legions from the Mechanicum. They had war fleets that could crack planets. The siege of Terra would be the largest battle in human history, and everyone knew the Loyalists would lose unless something changed. The Emperor had one advantage: time. Every day Horus spent traveling toward Terra was another day for Loyalist reinforcements to arrive. If the Ultramarines could break free from Calth, if the Dark Angels could finish their campaign and return, if the Space Wolves could reach Terra, the balance would shift. Horus knew this. He had to reach Terra quickly, had to finish the siege before reinforcements arrived. So he made a deal. He bargained with the Chaos Gods for power to accelerate his fleet's journey through the warp. The gods agreed, but the cost was steep. Horus gave himself over completely to chaos, allowed himself to be transformed into something more demon than Primarch. His soul was consumed. What remained wore Horus's face but wasn't truly him anymore. His fleet emerged from the warp at Terra ahead of schedule. The siege was about to begin. The siege of Terra wasn't one battle. It was dozens, maybe hundreds, happening simultaneously across the palace, the surrounding hive cities, and the orbital space above. When Horus's fleet arrived, they didn't just attack, they surrounded the entire planet, cutting off any chance of escape or reinforcement. The first phase was orbital bombardment. Horus's fleet had enough firepower to glass the entire planet, to turn Terra into a lifeless rock. But that wasn't the goal. He needed the palace intact. He needed to reach the Emperor personally, so the bombardment was targeted, surgical. They destroyed orbital defenses, landing platforms, communication arrays. They shattered the outer hive cities, killing billions, creating zones of absolute devastation that Loyalist forces couldn't use for defense. Then came the landings. Traitor forces descended in drop pods and landing craft. They established beachheads in the ruined hive cities surrounding the palace. These weren't just space marines. Horus brought corrupted Imperial Army regiments, traitor Titan legions, dark Mechanicum war machines, and hordes of demons that manifested wherever the warp bled into reality. The palace defenses were extraordinary. Rogel Dawn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, had spent years fortifying Terra. The palace walls were hundreds of meters thick, reinforced with adamantium, covered in weapons batteries. The entire structure was a fortress within a fortress, layer upon layer of defenses designed to withstand anything. But Horus had something the Emperor didn't expect. He had patience. The traitors didn't rush the walls. They surrounded the palace, cut it off, and began systematically destroying everything around it. They turned the siege into a war of attrition, betting that the defenders would run out of supplies before reinforcements arrived. Inside the palace, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Millions of refugees had fled into the palace grounds when the bombardment began. They needed food, water, medical supplies. The defenders had stockpiled resources, but not enough for this many people. Rationing began immediately, then starvation, then disease. The imperial fists held the walls. The blood angels defended the inner sanctums. The white scars conducted raids outside the palace, hitting traitor supply lines, buying time. But time was the one thing they didn't have. Every day the siege continued, more defenders died. More walls fell, more ground was lost. The traitors used tactics that loyalist forces couldn't counter. Demons manifested inside the palace, bypassing walls entirely. Corrupted cultists infiltrated as refugees, sabotaging defenses from within. Traitor titans walked through hive cities, their weapons reducing entire districts to rubble, and the noise, the constant, unending noise, artillery bombardment that never stopped, explosions that shook the ground, the screaming of demons and the dying. People who survived the siege described it as hell on earth. Not metaphorically, literally. The warp had torn so many holes in reality that terror itself was becoming part of the immaterium. Sanguinius, Primarch of the Blood Angels, fought on the walls personally. He was one of the most beloved Primarchs, known for his nobility and compassion. His legion adored him. His presence inspired the defenders, gave them hope when everything seemed lost. But Sanguinius knew something the others didn't. He'd seen his own death in visions. He knew he wouldn't survive the siege. Rogel Dawn coordinated the defense with mechanical precision. He'd built the palace. He knew every wall, every choke point, every fallback position. When one section fell, he redirected forces to the next. When ammunition ran low, he rationed it ruthlessly. He was fighting a losing battle, and he knew it, but he refused to give up. Jagatai Khan, Primarch of the White Scars, operated outside the palace. His legion specialized in fast attacks, hit-and-run tactics. They couldn't match the traitors in direct combat, but they could harass them, slow them down, disrupt their supply lines. Khan's forces were the only thing preventing Horus from committing his full strength to the assault. The Emperor remained in the throne room. He didn't fight on the walls. He couldn't. He was engaged in a different battle, one happening entirely in the warp. While the physical siege raged, the Emperor fought the Chaos Gods themselves, preventing them from manifesting directly on Terra. This psychic battle consumed most of his attention, leaving the physical defense to his sons. Weeks passed. The palace walls began to fall. The outer defenses collapsed under sustained bombardment. Traitor forces pushed into the palace grounds. The defenders fell back to the inner walls, then the inner sanctums. The space they controlled shrank daily. Then something changed. Horus received intelligence that the Ultramarines had broken free from Kalf. They were en route to Terra. The Dark Angels were also returning, having finished their campaign against traitor forces. If both legions reached Terra, Horus would lose. His advantage in numbers would evaporate. The siege would turn into a prolonged conflict he couldn't win. Horus made a decision. He lowered the void shields on his flagship. This was significant because void shields were the only thing protecting his ship from attack. Lowering them was an invitation. He was telling the Emperor, "I'm here. Come and face me." Why would Horus do this? Because he knew the Emperor. He knew that despite everything, despite the betrayal and the bloodshed, the Emperor still loved his son, and he knew the Emperor would try to save him, would hope there was something of Horus left that could be redeemed. The Emperor understood it was a trap, but he also understood he had no choice. If Horus's shields were down, the Emperor could teleport directly onto the flagship. He could end the siege immediately by killing Horus. It was risky, but it was the only move that made sense. The Emperor assembled a boarding party. He would lead it personally. Sanguinius insisted on coming. Rogel Dawn wanted to come, but was needed to coordinate the palace defense. So it was the Emperor, Sanguinius, and a contingent of custodians and terminators. They would teleport onto Horus's flagship, fight their way to him, and end this. The teleportation didn't go as planned. Warp interference scattered the boarding party across the ship. Some appeared in the wrong sections, some were lost entirely. The Emperor and Sanguinius ended up separated. Both were deep in the ship, but in different locations. Sanguinius found himself alone, or nearly so. A few blood angels had teleported with him, but they were quickly killed by traitor forces. He fought his way through the ship, cutting down traitors, demons, anyone who stood between him and Horus. He knew he was walking to his death. His visions had shown him this moment countless times, but he went anyway. He reached Horus first before the Emperor. The two Primarchs faced each other in a massive chamber. Horus tried to turn him, offered him power, promised him anything if he joined the traitors. Sanguinius refused. He'd come too far, seen too much, lost too many of his sons to ever consider betrayal. They fought. Sanguinius was an incredible warrior, one of the best duelists among the Primarchs. But Horus had been empowered by all four Chaos gods. He wasn't just a Primarch anymore. He was a vessel for their combined might. Sanguinius wounded him, tore a chink in Horus's armor, drew blood. But it wasn't enough. Horus killed him. The angel died defending his father, buying time for the Emperor to arrive. His body lay broken at Horus's feet when the Emperor finally reached the chamber. The Emperor saw his son dead. The son who'd been loyal from the beginning, who'd never wavered, who died trying to protect him. And he saw Horus standing over the body, completely corrupted, completely lost to chaos. In that moment, the Emperor understood there was nothing left to save. What happened next is described differently depending on who's telling the story. Some say they fought for hours, others say it was over in seconds. The truth is probably somewhere between. The Emperor and Horus clashed with power that shouldn't exist in physical space. Psychic energy and warp corruption, meeting in a battle that threatened to tear reality apart. The Emperor was more powerful. He always had been. But he held back. Even now, even seeing what Horus had become, he couldn't bring himself to destroy his son completely. He tried to wound, to disable, to somehow separate Horus from the chaos corruption. Horus took advantage of this hesitation. He struck the Emperor down, wounded him so severely that he was barely alive. The Emperor lay broken, dying. Horus stood over him, ready to deliver the killing blow. Then a guardsman entered the chamber. His name was Orlanius Pius, though some versions of the story changed the details. He was just a human, a normal soldier, nothing special. He saw the Emperor dying and Horus about to kill him, and he stepped between them. Horus killed him instantly, destroyed him completely, erased him from existence with a casual gesture, and that act, that pointless cruelty against someone who posed no threat, finally showed the Emperor the truth. There was nothing left of his son. The being wearing Horus's face was completely consumed by chaos. There was no redemption possible. The Emperor unleashed his full power. He struck Horus with psychic might that obliterated him completely. Not just his body, but his soul. He erased Horus from existence so thoroughly that not even the Chaos gods could resurrect him. The War Master, the favored son, was gone. But the cost was catastrophic. The Emperor was dying. His body was ruined beyond any hope of healing. He'd expended so much power destroying Horus that he had nothing left to sustain himself. Rogel Dawn found him. The Imperial fists had fought their way onto the flagship when the void shields dropped. Dawn reached the throne room and found the Emperor barely alive, Sanguinius dead and Horus obliterated. He carried the Emperor back to Terra personally. The traitor forces broke when word spread that Horus was dead. Without their leader, without their unifying figure, the traitor legions fractured. Some fled into the warp, others fought to the death. The siege ended not with a final climactic battle, but with the traitors simply collapsing. The loyalists had won, but the cost was unthinkable. Terra was in ruins, billions were dead, 3 legions were devastated, 2 Primarchs were dead, and the Emperor himself was barely alive, his body so damaged that the only thing keeping him conscious was the most advanced life support system the Mechanicum could build. They placed him on the Golden Throne, a device originally meant for a completely different purpose. The throne could sustain his life, could keep his consciousness active, but at a terrible price. The Emperor would be trapped there forever, unable to move, unable to speak, barely able to think. He would become a corpse on a throne, sustained by the sacrifice of thousands of psychers daily, their souls fed to him to keep his own from dissipating. This was the outcome. The heresy was over, but the Imperium had lost its leader, its direction, its hope. What came next would be called the Scouring, a period where loyalist forces hunted down the remaining traitors and drove them into the Eye of Terror. But the damage was done. The Imperium would never recover from the heresy. It would survive, would endure for 10,000 years, but it would never again reach the heights it had achieved during the Great Crusade. The dream of the imperial truth was dead. What replaced it was something darker, more brutal, more desperate. The Imperium became exactly what the Emperor had tried to prevent, a theocratic empire that worshipped him as a god, despite his explicit rejection of such worship. The irony would be lost on most, but it defined everything that followed. The aftermath of the heresy required someone to lead. The Emperor was locked in the Golden Throne, barely conscious, his mind focused entirely on maintaining the Astronomicon and keeping the webway sealed. He couldn't speak, couldn't issue orders, couldn't guide the Imperium he'd built. Someone had to step into that vacuum. Robout Guilliman took charge. The Ultramarines Primarch was a natural leader, an administrator and strategist who understood logistics and organization as well as warfare. While other Primarchs excelled at conquest, Guilliman excelled at governance. He'd turned Ultramar into a model society, and now he applied those same principles to the shattered Imperium. But Guilliman wasn't alone. Several key figures emerged in the immediate aftermath who would shape the Imperium's future. Rogel Dawn commanded the defense of Terra and the reconstruction efforts. The Imperial Fists became builders as much as warriors, fortifying the Imperial Palace and turning Terra into an impregnable fortress. Chagatai Khan led rapid strike forces, hunting down traitor remnants before they could regroup. The White Scar's speed made them perfect for this role, striking hard and fast across vast distances. Leman Russ led the Space Wolves in the most brutal campaigns of the Scouring. They showed no mercy to traitors, executing them wherever they found them. The Wolves became the Emperor's executioners in truth, carrying out the vengeance of a dying god. Korax and the Raven Guard waged shadow wars against traitor strongholds, infiltrating and destroying from within. Their expertise in stealth operations made them invaluable for striking targets that conventional forces couldn't reach, but not all Loyalist Primarchs survived or remained active. Sanguinius was dead, his body entombed on Baal. The Blood Angels mourned their father and struggled with the psychological scars his death had inflicted on their legion. Ferrus Manus was dead, killed by Fulgrim on Istvan V. The Iron Hands became even more ruthless and cold, their hatred of weakness extending to their own flesh as they replaced more and more of themselves with cybernetics. Vulcan disappeared. The Salamander's Primarch had survived the heresy, but he vanished shortly after, leaving his legion without their father. Some said he'd gone on a pilgrimage, seeking artifacts he'd hidden across the galaxy. Others believed he'd simply had enough of war. The Lion, Primarch of the Dark Angels, returned to Caliban to find his homeworld in rebellion. Luther and the Dark Angels who'd been left behind had turned traitor, corrupted by chaos during their years of isolation. The Lion and Luther fought, and their battle destroyed Caliban completely. The planet shattered, leaving only fragments floating in space. The Lion fell in that battle, mortally wounded but not killed. His body was hidden by the Watchers in the dark, mysterious beings who'd always guided the Dark Angels. He would sleep in the depths of the rock, the largest fragment of Caliban, waiting for a time when he might be needed again. Guilliman spent years organizing the Scouring and then the rebuilding. He authored the Codex Astartes, a comprehensive military doctrine that would govern Space Marine operations for the next 10,000 years. But more controversially, he decreed that the legions must be broken up. The legions were too powerful. A single legion could conquer or destroy entire sectors. If another Primarch fell to chaos, they could bring their entire legion with them, as Horus had done. That couldn't be allowed to happen again. Guilliman proposed splitting each legion into chapters of approximately 1,000 Space Marines. Each chapter would be independent, with its own leadership and traditions. They'd maintain genetic ties to their parent legion, but they wouldn't answer to a Primarch. They'd answer to the High Lords of Terra. This was immediately controversial. Dawn refused outright. The Imperial Fists were his sons. He wouldn't scatter them across the galaxy like seeds in the wind. Other Primarchs had similar objections. Their legions were their families, their life's work. Breaking them up felt like destroying everything they'd built. But Guilliman was insistent. He'd seen what happened when too much power was concentrated in one place. The legions had to be divided. For the Imperium's safety, for the future of humanity, the age of the legions had to end. Eventually, most Primarchs agreed, some because they saw the wisdom in it, others because they were simply too exhausted to fight about it. The second founding occurred, and the legions were broken into successor chapters. The Ultramarines became dozens of chapters, each bearing the colors and symbols of their progenitor, but maintaining independence. The Blood Angels, the Imperial Fists, the White Scars, all divided into smaller forces. Some legions resisted longer than others. The Space Wolves refused to break into multiple chapters, claiming their unique gene seed made it impossible. They made one successor chapter to satisfy the decree, but remained largely intact. The Dark Angels similarly maintained unusual cohesion, their successor chapters operating almost as a unified legion in secret. But the deed was done. The age of the legions ended. The age of the chapters began. As the Imperium reorganized, the question of governance became critical. The Emperor couldn't rule. The Primarchs were busy with the Scouring and their own legion affairs. Someone had to manage the Imperium's day-to-day operations. The High Lords of Terror emerged as that governing body. 12 positions, each representing a different aspect of Imperial authority. The Lord Commander of the Imperium, usually the Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, the Grand Master of Assassins, the Master of the Administratum, the Fabricator General of Mars, representatives of the various military arms and administrative bodies. These weren't elected positions, they were appointments made by the other High Lords when a seat became vacant. It was a system designed to maintain continuity, to prevent any single individual from seizing too much power. But it was also a system prone to stagnation and bureaucratic gridlock. The High Lords made decisions by consensus. Major changes required agreement from multiple members. This made rapid response difficult, but prevented any one lord from acting unilaterally. It was a system built for stability, not efficiency. Guilliman served as Lord Commander for years, guiding the Imperium through its early recovery. But eventually, he too disappeared. While on a campaign in the eastern fringes, he was poisoned by a demon blade wielded by Fulgrim. The wound didn't kill him, but it put him in a state of suspended animation, his body held in stasis on Macragga. The Ultramarines would guard their father for 10,000 years, waiting for a cure that wouldn't come until the 41st millennium. With Guilliman gone, the Imperium lost its most effective administrator. The other Primarchs gradually disappeared as well. Russ went into the Eye of Terror, seeking a way to undo Magnus's transformation, promising he'd return for the final battle. He never came back. Corax followed the traitors into the warp, hunting them through the Immaterium itself. The Raven Guard lost contact with their Primarch and haven't heard from him since. Jagatai Khan pursued a Dark Eldar raid into the Webway and vanished. The White Scars believe he still fights there, waging an eternal war in the labyrinthine passages. Dawn disappeared during a Black Crusade centuries later. Only his hand was recovered, still clutching his sword. The Imperial Fists maintain that he's still alive somewhere, but there's been no sign of him for millennia. Within a few centuries of the heresy's end, all the loyalist Primarchs were gone, dead, missing, or sleeping in hidden chambers. The Imperium's greatest heroes had vanished, leaving only their sons to carry on their legacies. This created a power vacuum that changed the Imperium fundamentally. Without the Primarchs, without the Emperor's direct guidance, the Imperium had to function on its own, and what emerged was something very different from what the Emperor had envisioned. The Imperial cult became the dominant force in Imperial society. The Emperor had rejected divinity. He'd explicitly stated he wasn't a god, had built the Imperial truth on secular principles, but in his absence on the Golden Throne, sustained by the deaths of thousands of psychers daily, unable to deny or confirm anything, the Emperor became a god anyway. The ecclesiarchy emerged as the official church of the Imperium. They preached that the Emperor was divine, that he watched over humanity from his golden throne, that faith in him provided protection against the darkness. This was everything the Emperor had fought against during the Great Crusade, but it was also exactly what the Imperium needed to survive, because the truth was, faith in the Emperor did provide protection. The warp responds to belief and emotion. Billions of humans believing the Emperor was a god actually gave him power in the warp. Their faith created a bulwark against chaos, a beacon of hope that pushed back the darkness. The Imperial cult, however much it contradicted the Emperor's original vision, became humanity's best defense against demonic corruption. The Adeptus Ministorum, the official name for the ecclesiarchy, grew to become one of the most powerful institutions in the Imperium. They controlled vast resources, maintained their own military forces in the form of the Adeptus Sororitas, and wielded immense political influence. They declared what was heresy and what was orthodoxy. They decided what could be said, what could be believed, what could be questioned. This created an imperium that was dogmatic, rigid, and intolerant. Innovation was viewed with suspicion. Deviation from accepted practices was heresy. The Mechanicum's monopoly on technology meant that instead of advancing, humanity's technological capabilities actually regressed. STCs were lost or corrupted. Knowledge was forgotten. The Imperium maintained its technology through rote repetition and religious ritual rather than understanding. The Inquisition emerged as another major power, granted unlimited authority to root out heresy, corruption, and Xenos influence. The Inquisition operated outside normal imperial law. An inquisitor could commandeer entire fleets, execute planetary governors, declare exterminatus on worlds they deemed irredeemable. They answered only to other inquisitors and the emperor himself. The Inquisition divided into three major ordos. The Ordo Hereticus hunted heretics and rogue psychers within the Imperium. The Ordo Xenos dealt with alien threats. The Ordo Malleus specialized in combating demons and chaos corruption. Each Ordo developed its own methods and traditions. The Ordo Hereticus worked closely with the ecclesiarchy and the Sisters of Battle. The Ordo Xenos employed Deathwatch Space Marines, specialists drawn from various chapters and trained to fight Xenos threats. The Ordo Malleus commanded the Grey Knights, a secret chapter of Space Marines created specifically to fight demons. The Grey Knights deserve special mention. They were founded during the heresy by Malcador the Sigillite, the Emperor's closest advisor. Malcador had foreseen the need for Space Marines who were completely immune to chaos corruption. He gathered the purest recruits, subjected them to the most intensive screening and training, and created a chapter whose existence was kept secret from most of the Imperium. The Grey Knight's gene seed came from the Emperor himself. They were his direct descendants in a way that even other Space Marines weren't. This gave them innate resistance to chaos corruption. A Grey Knight could stand in the presence of greater demons and not feel the slightest temptation. They were incorruptible, the perfect weapon against humanity's greatest enemy. But they were also ruthless. Grey Knight's operations often required killing Imperial citizens who'd witnessed demonic incursions, ensuring that knowledge of chaos didn't spread. They would purge entire planets if necessary, deciding that some secrets were too dangerous for anyone to know. This was the Imperium that emerged from the ashes of the heresy, brutal, dogmatic, paranoid, and utterly committed to humanity's survival at any cost. It was an empire built on fear and faith, held together by violence and bureaucracy, advancing nowhere but refusing to fall. And in the warp, watching all of this, the Chaos Gods laughed. They succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. The Chaos Gods had always been forces of the warp, but the heresy transformed them into something far more dangerous. The sheer volume of emotion, death, and suffering across 10,000 years of conflict fed them in ways they'd never experienced before. Khorne grew fat on the violence of brother killing brother. Tzeentch reveled in the betrayals and schemes. Nurgle feasted on the despair and disease. Slaanesh luxuriated in the excess and depravity. But more than just growing stronger, the Chaos Gods had fundamentally altered the galaxy's trajectory. They'd prevented humanity from achieving its potential as a psychic species. They'd shattered the Emperor's plan to guide humanity's evolution in a controlled way, and they'd ensured that humanity would forever be vulnerable to demonic corruption because the knowledge of how to resist it had been lost. The Emperor's original plan had been elegant in its simplicity. He would unite humanity under a secular government. He would eliminate all religion and superstition. He would guide humanity's psychic awakening through controlled exposure to the warp, teaching them to use their powers safely. And once humanity had fully evolved into a psychic race, they would be strong enough to resist chaos permanently. The Great Crusade was supposed to be the first step in this plan. Unite humanity, eliminate threats, establish the Imperial truth. The Webway project was the second step, providing safe, faster-than-light travel without the warp. And the third step, never openly discussed, was to systematically educate humanity about the true nature of the warp once they were strong enough to handle that knowledge without being corrupted. But chaos sabotaged every stage. They corrupted Horus and half the legions. They destroyed the Webway project. They forced the Emperor onto the Golden Throne. And most devastatingly, they ensured that humanity would never receive the education they needed to safely coexist with the warp. Instead, the Imperium emerged as a theocracy that actively suppressed knowledge about chaos. The average Imperial citizen didn't know that chaos existed. They didn't understand that demons were real. They weren't taught how to recognize the signs of corruption or how to resist it. This ignorance made them more vulnerable, not less. Think about it this way. If you tell someone that a dangerous predator exists, describe what it looks like, explain how it hunts, and teach them how to defend against it, they have a chance to survive an encounter. But if you keep them ignorant, insisting the predator doesn't exist while simultaneously telling them never to go into the forest, they're helpless when they inevitably face it. That's what the Imperium did with chaos. They suppressed all knowledge of it, declared even speaking about demons to be heresy, and punished anyone who asked questions. This meant that when chaos corruption did appear, people didn't recognize it until it was too late. They couldn't identify the early warning signs. They didn't know how to resist temptation because they didn't know they were being tempted. The Inquisition understood this problem but had no solution. They knew that complete ignorance made people vulnerable, but they also knew that partial knowledge was even more dangerous. A little bit of information about chaos could lead people to experiment, to try summoning demons, to willingly embrace corruption out of curiosity or ambition. So the Inquisition operated on a strict need-to-know basis. Most inquisitors themselves only knew about the specific aspects of chaos relevant to their work. Only the highest-ranking members of the Ordo Malleus understood the full picture, and even they kept secrets from each other, fragmenting knowledge to prevent any single point of failure. This created a galaxy-wide game of telephone where crucial information was constantly being lost, misunderstood, or deliberately obscured. Patterns that could have revealed chaos corruption went unnoticed because no one person had access to all the data. Warning signs were ignored because the people seeing them didn't understand their significance. Meanwhile, chaos continued to spread, not through grand invasions or obvious corruption, but through subtle influence. A governor who made increasingly harsh decisions, convinced they were necessary for order. A priest who slowly twisted the imperial creed to justify atrocities. A scholar who discovered forbidden knowledge and couldn't resist investigating further. Each individual corruption seemed small, isolated, manageable. But across millions of worlds, these small corruptions added up to a massive problem. Chaos didn't need to conquer the Imperium through military force. They were corrupting it from within, one soul at a time, turning the Imperium's own structure and beliefs into weapons against itself. The irony was thick. The Emperor had tried to build a rational, secular empire, free from religious superstition. But in failing, he'd created an empire that was more religious, more superstitious, and more irrational than anything that had existed during Old Night. The imperial creed that worshipped him as a god was exactly the kind of belief system he'd spent centuries trying to eliminate. And the Chaos Gods found this absolutely hilarious. They'd turned the Emperor's own plan against him. His attempt to eliminate religion had resulted in the largest, most dogmatic religion in galactic history. His attempt to educate humanity about the warp had resulted in complete ignorance. His attempt to guide humanity's psychic evolution had resulted in psychers being feared, persecuted, and often killed before they could learn to control their powers. Every aspect of the Emperor's plan had been inverted, corrupted, turned into its opposite. The Imperium that emerged from the heresy was a perfect example of how good intentions can create terrible outcomes when sabotaged by malevolent forces. But here's what makes this truly tragic. The Imperium's current state isn't sustainable. It's slowly collapsing under its own weight, but so gradually that it's almost imperceptible. Worlds are lost to chaos corruption, Xenos invasion, or simple neglect. Technology is forgotten faster than it can be rediscovered. The bureaucracy becomes more bloated and inefficient with each passing century. The Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that makes warp travel possible, requires the sacrifice of thousands of psychers daily to maintain. The Emperor on his golden throne consumes these psychers like fuel, burning through them to keep the beacon lit. Without it, the Imperium would fragment into isolated systems within days. But the number of psychers required keeps increasing. The Emperor's condition is deteriorating. The Golden Throne itself is failing, its ancient technology breaking down in ways the Mechanicum can't repair because they don't understand how it works. They maintain it through ritual and prayer, replacing components when they fail, but the underlying systems are beyond their comprehension. At some point, probably within the next few millennia, the Golden Throne will fail completely. When that happens, one of two things will occur. Either the Emperor will finally die, his soul dissipating or perhaps reforming in the warp, or he'll regenerate, his perpetual nature allowing him to revive as he has in the past. No one knows which will happen. The Emperor's been on the throne for 10,000 years, far longer than any of his previous deaths took to recover from. His body is barely alive, sustained entirely by the throne's machinery. Whether his perpetual nature can overcome such catastrophic damage is unknown. If he dies permanently, the Astronomicon goes out. The Imperium fragments. Terra itself probably becomes a new Eye of Terror as the human souls in the webway breach finally tear through into reality. It's an apocalyptic scenario that would make the Horus Heresy look like a minor skirmish. If he regenerates, he'll return to a galaxy that's completely different from the one he left. He'll find himself worshipped as a god by an empire that's the antithesis of everything he tried to build. He'll discover that his plans for humanity's psychic evolution have been abandoned. He'll see that the Webway project failed and can never be completed. What would he do with that knowledge? Would he try to rebuild according to his original vision? Would he accept the Imperium as it is and work within its constraints? Would he rage against the corruption of his ideals? There's no way to know. Some Imperial scholars, the few who dare to think about such things, have suggested that perhaps the Emperor's suffering on the Golden Throne is itself a form of apotheosis, that after 10,000 years of being worshipped by quadrillions of humans, sustained by their faith, empowered by their devotion, he might actually have become the god they believe him to be. This theory suggests that the Emperor is transcending his physical form, becoming a warp entity similar to the Chaos Gods, but aligned with humanity's interests. The Astronomicon would be evidence of this, a psychic beacon powered not just by the Golden Throne, but by the collective faith of humanity itself. If this theory is correct, then the Emperor's death wouldn't be an ending, but a transformation. He'd fully transition into a warp god, no longer bound by physical limitations, able to actively oppose chaos in the Immaterium. The God Emperor of mankind would become literally true. But this is speculation. The reality is that no one knows what will happen when the Golden Throne fails. The Imperium is gambling its entire existence on the hope that the Emperor has a plan, that his suffering serves some purpose, that his eventual return or transformation will save humanity. It's a desperate hope, but in the grim darkness of the far future, hope is sometimes all that remains. The structure of the Imperium in the 41st millennium reflects this desperation. Every institution exists primarily to delay collapse rather than to build anything new. The Administratum doesn't govern efficiently, it just prevents total chaos. The Mechanicum doesn't advance technology, it just maintains what already exists. The Ecclesiarchy doesn't inspire spiritual growth, it just enforces conformity. Even the Space Marines, the Emperor's finest warriors, have become more about symbolism than practical military power. There are approximately 1 million Space Marines across 1,000 chapters, defending an Imperium of millions of worlds. That's mathematically insignificant. 1 Marine per 1,000 worlds, give or take. What the Space Marines really provide is psychological warfare. They're living legends, superhuman warriors who inspire Imperial forces and terrify enemies. When a chapter arrives to defend a world, the defenders fight harder because they believe victory is possible. The enemies sometimes retreat or surrender because they believe defeat is inevitable. This is why the chapters maintain their heraldry, their rituals, their individual identities. It's not just tradition, it's practical psychology. The Blood Angels are known for their nobility and their curse. The Space Wolves are known for their ferocity and their independence. The Ultramarines are known for their discipline and their adherence to the Codex. Each chapter's reputation serves a specific purpose in the Imperium's propaganda machine. But there's something deeply sad about this. The Space Marines were created to be the Emperor's generals and administrators during the Great Crusade. They were meant to lead humanity to glory, to build civilization, to explore and expand and create. Instead, they've become weapons that are wielded by others, symbols deployed to shore up a failing system, tools used to delay inevitable collapse. Many chapters don't even realize this. They believe they're still serving the Emperor's plan, still working towards some greater purpose. They don't understand that the Imperium they defend is a mockery of what the Emperor intended. They don't know that their Primarchs, if they could see what their legions have become, might not recognize them. The Chaos Space Marines understand this better than their loyalist counterparts. They've seen both sides. They remember the Great Crusade and compare it to the current Imperium. They know what was lost, and many of them, in their more lucid moments, feel a profound sense of waste. That's why some Chaos Marines don't actually want to destroy the Imperium. They want to save it in their twisted way. They look at the Imperium and see the corpse of the Emperor's dream, and they think they can resurrect it by burning away the rot. Of course, their methods involve demon worship and human sacrifice, so their version of salvation would be unrecognizable to anyone sane. But the impulse, the desire to reclaim what was lost, that's real. It's what makes them tragic rather than simply evil. The Imperium's relationship with its own past is complicated. On one hand, the Great Crusade is held up as the Golden Age, the time when the Emperor walked among men and humanity conquered the stars. On the other, the truth of that era is suppressed because it contradicts current dogma. The Emperor didn't want to be worshipped as a god. The current Imperium is built entirely on worshipping him as a god. The Emperor believed in science and reason. The current Imperium treats technology as holy mystery and rationality as potential heresy. The Emperor wanted to eliminate religion. The current Imperium is the most fanatically religious civilization imaginable. This cognitive dissonance is managed through selective memory and deliberate ignorance. The ecclesiarchy teaches a version of history that supports current doctrine. The Inquisition eliminates anyone who knows too much about how things actually were. The administratum buries inconvenient records under mountains of bureaucracy. The result is that most imperial citizens genuinely believe the current system is what the Emperor intended. They think the Imperium has always been this way, that the Emperor founded the imperial cult, that the current practices and beliefs reflect his divine will. Only a few organizations preserve accurate historical knowledge. The Inquisition knows the truth but suppresses it. The Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guards who still stand watch over the Golden Throne, remember everything but rarely share that knowledge. Some of the oldest Space Marine chapters retain fragments of truth in their private archives, and the Chaos Space Marines, ironically, are among the most reliable sources of accurate Imperial history because they lived through it and have no reason to lie to themselves about what happened. But even among those who know the truth, there's debate about what it means. Did the Emperor fail? Did his plan have a fatal flaw from the beginning? Or did he succeed in ways we don't understand yet? The Emperor's plan was always long-term, measured in millennia rather than centuries. Perhaps everything that's happened, including his confinement to the Golden Throne, is part of some grand design we can't comprehend. This uncertainty extends to the Emperor's current state. Is he even conscious? Does he perceive what's happening in the Imperium? Can he think, plan, act in any meaningful way? Or is he trapped in an eternal moment of agony, aware only of pain, his vast intellect reduced to nothing but the need to hold the webway gate closed? Some believe he's actively guiding the Imperium through subtle means. The phenomenon of living saints, ordinary humans who manifest miraculous powers and lead Imperial forces to victory, is attributed to the Emperor's will. The fact that the Astronomicon still functions despite the Golden Throne's deterioration suggests active maintenance rather than passive function. Reports of the Emperor speaking to individuals in dreams or visions, while often dismissed as delusion or heresy, are numerous enough to suggest something real might be happening. Others believe he's essentially dead, that what remains is just psychic residue, the momentum of his will rather than conscious thought. In this interpretation, the Emperor is like a star that's already gone supernova, but whose light still reaches us. The miracles attributed to him are actually manifestations of humanity's collective faith, shaped by the warp into something that resembles the Emperor, but isn't actually him. there's also the possibility that he's something else entirely now. 10,000 years of agony, of consuming 1,000 souls daily, of holding back chaos itself, might have transformed him into something that's neither alive nor dead, neither human nor God, something unprecedented in the galaxy's history. The Emperor's sons, his primarchs, have each responded to their father's fate differently. Guilliman, the only loyalist primarch confirmed to have returned in the current era, was horrified by what he found. He saw the Imperium Nihilus, the dark half of the galaxy cut off by the Great Rift. He saw the fanaticism of the ecclesiarchy. He saw the stagnation of the Mechanicum. He saw the incompetence of the High Lords, and he saw his father, entombed and silent, neither confirming nor denying Guilliman's desperate questions. Guilliman's attempt to reform the Imperium, to push it closer to what the Emperor intended, has met with mixed results. He's powerful enough that no one can openly oppose him, but the Imperium's institutions resist change with bureaucratic inertia. Every reform gets watered down in implementation. Every new policy creates 10 new problems. The system is too massive, too entrenched, too dependent on its own dysfunction to be easily fixed. And Guilliman knows he's working on borrowed time. He's functionally immortal now thanks to the armor that keeps him alive, but he's one man trying to steer a ship the size of the galaxy. When he eventually falls, whether to enemy action or exhaustion or simple bad luck, what reforms he's managed to implement will likely unravel. The Imperium will snap back to its default state of barely controlled chaos. The other loyalist primarchs, if they return, will face similar challenges. Vulcan, the perpetual who cannot permanently die, is somewhere in the galaxy. The Lion, primarch of the Dark Angels, recently awakened from 10,000 years of stasis. Russ, primarch of the Space Wolves, disappeared into the Eye of Terror, seeking a way to heal the Emperor. Corax, primarch of the Raven Guard, has been hunting traitors in the warp for millennia. Dawn might be alive, though records say he died. Khan is lost in the webway, fighting an endless war against Dark Eldar. Each of them, if they return, will have their own response to what the Imperium has become, but their individual reactions matter less than the systemic problems they'll face. The Imperium doesn't need heroes. Heroes can't fix institutional rot. What the Imperium needs is fundamental restructuring, which would require tearing down the existing system and building something new. That's impossible without triggering civil war, which would doom humanity to extinction. So the Imperium is trapped, unable to reform because reform would destroy it, unable to continue as is because the current path leads to inevitable collapse. This is the trap the Emperor's enemies understood from the beginning. You don't need to destroy the Imperium through direct assault. You just need to wound it badly enough that its own size and complexity become fatal. Every crisis the Imperium faces, even when successfully resolved, damages the overall structure. Every world lost to invasion is a world whose resources no longer support the greater whole. Every Space Marine chapter that falls to chaos is a loss that can't be replaced. Every generation of attrition among the Imperial Guard weakens the military foundation, and the Imperium can't stop fighting. It's surrounded by enemies. The Tyranid hive fleets are consuming entire sectors. The Necrons are awakening from their ancient slumber and reclaiming their worlds. The Orcs mass into wars that threaten entire subsectors. The Tau Empire expands steadily. The various chaos incursions and demonic manifestations require constant vigilance. The Dark Eldar raid from the webway, stealing slaves and spreading terror. Even other human civilizations, those who rejected the Imperium or never joined it, sometimes pose threats. The Imperium's military is spread impossibly thin. When a crisis emerges, the response time can be decades. A world might fall completely before reinforcements even arrive. This is why individual worlds need to be self-sufficient in their defense, why the Imperial Guard regiments are raised locally before being shipped off to fight elsewhere, why Space Marine chapters maintain their own recruitment and supply chains. But self-sufficiency creates its own problems. Worlds that can defend themselves don't always need the Imperium. Separatist movements emerge. Local governors declare independence. Entire systems break away during periods of isolation. The Imperium has to constantly reconquer its own territory, putting down rebellions and enforcing compliance, which drains resources that should be defending against external threats. The Imperium's navy tries to maintain control of space, but space is vast beyond comprehension. The gaps between stars are so enormous that patrolling them is impossible. Pirates and raiders operate freely in the spaces between Imperial authority. Chaos fleets emerge from the warp to strike and fade before defense forces can respond. Tyrannid swarms approach from intergalactic space, from directions the Imperium can't even monitor effectively. And every ship the Imperium builds is a ship that might have been something else. Every resource devoted to military production is a resource not used for civilian needs. Every person trained as a soldier is a person not farming or manufacturing or conducting research. The Imperium is cannibalizing itself, burning through resources and lives to maintain a military that's barely adequate to the threats it faces. The tragedy is that this is necessary. The galaxy really is that hostile. The threats really are that severe. If the Imperium reduced its military spending, it would be conquered within a century. The current level of militarization is the minimum required for survival, not some paranoid overreaction. But maintaining that level requires brutal efficiency, totalitarian control, and the sacrifice of everything that might make civilization worth preserving. This is what makes Warhammer's setting so effectively dark. It's not grim dark because everyone is comically evil, or because suffering is inflicted for no reason. It's grimdark because the horrific conditions are actually necessary responses to genuine existential threats. The Imperium isn't wrong to be paranoid. There really are infiltrators and traitors and demons wearing human skin. The Inquisition isn't wrong to be ruthless. Chaos corruption really does spread exponentially if not immediately purged. The Mechanicum isn't wrong to fear innovation. There really are technologies that invite demonic possession. Every seemingly absurd or excessive aspect of the Imperium exists because the alternative is worse. Public executions, they maintain order in a civilization too vast for effective policing. Child soldiers, they're necessary because training warriors takes decades and threats emerge constantly. Hive cities where billions live in darkness, they're the only way to concentrate population densely enough to defend. The worship of the Emperor, it's the only unifying force in a civilization that spans the galaxy. And yet, despite all this, the Imperium is losing. Slowly, inexorably, across 10,000 years, it's losing ground. The rate of loss is measured in centuries, so individual humans don't perceive it. But compare maps from different millennia, and the trend is clear. Territory shrinks. Threats multiply. Resources dwindle. The Great Rift's opening merely accelerated a process that was already underway. The question isn't whether the Imperium will fall. It's what comes after. Some believe humanity will rise from the ashes, that the fall of the Imperium will allow for something better to emerge. Others think humanity's extinction is inevitable, that we're watching the slow death of a species that reached too far. Still others believe the Emperor has planned for this, that the Imperium's fall is a necessary stage in humanity's transformation into something new. The Eldar have a word for this. They call it the Rana Dandra, the final battle between order and chaos that will determine the fate of the galaxy. They believe they've already lost their version of it, that the fall of the Eldar was their Rana Dandra, and they're now living in the aftermath. They see humanity approaching its own version of that battle, and they're not sure which side will win. What makes this particularly bitter for the Eldar is that humanity is repeating their mistakes. The Eldar fell because they grew decadent and lost sight of the dangers of the warp. Humanity is falling because it grew rigid and lost the ability to adapt. Different paths, same destination. The Eldar tried to warn humanity during the Great Crusade, but the Emperor ignored them. He thought he knew better. Now both species are paying the price for their arrogance. The Eldar at least have a plan. They're trying to birth a new god, Inead, the god of the dead, who might be strong enough to destroy Slanesh and free the Eldar souls trapped in She Who Thirsts. It's a desperate plan with a low probability of success, but it's something. The Imperium doesn't even have that. The Imperium's plan is to keep fighting until the Emperor's plan, whatever it is, comes to fruition. But they don't know what that plan is. No one does. Not the High Lords of Terror, not the most powerful Inquisitors, not even the Primarchs who've returned. The Emperor sits on his throne, burning through 1,000 souls a day, maintaining the Astronomicon, holding back the demons trying to break through from the warp, and possibly planning something, or possibly just surviving. No one can ask him. He hasn't spoken clearly in 10,000 years. The few times psychers have tried to commune with him directly, they've received fragments, images without context, warnings without specifics, instructions that make no sense. It's like trying to have a conversation with someone who's simultaneously existing in a million places across space and time, seeing past and future and present all at once, fighting battles on planes of existence humans can't perceive. Some believe the Emperor is waiting for something, a specific alignment of events, a particular threshold to be crossed, a moment when his plan can finally unfold. Others think he's trapped, that maintaining the Astronomicon and holding the webway gate closed requires all his attention, and he literally cannot spare the consciousness to communicate properly. There's a third possibility that no one wants to acknowledge, that the Emperor is dying, that he's been dying for 10,000 years, that the Golden Throne is failing, and when it finally gives out, the Emperor will die, and Terra will be consumed by the largest warp rift in galactic history. That all of this, all 10,000 years of suffering and sacrifice, has just been postponing the inevitable. The Mechanicum knows the Golden Throne is deteriorating. They've been trying to repair it for millennia, but they don't fully understand the technology. It was built during the dark age of technology using knowledge that's since been lost. Every repair they make is essentially a patch, a temporary fix that might last centuries, but won't address the fundamental degradation. There are components in the Golden Throne that the Mechanicum can't even identify, let alone reproduce. Pieces of technology so advanced they might as well be magic. And those components are failing, slowly, incrementally, but measurably. The Mechanicum's projections suggest the throne has maybe a few thousand years left, maybe less. They keep this information from the broader Imperium because the panic it would cause would be worse than the problem itself. So the Imperium continues, keeps fighting, keeps sacrificing, keeps hoping that somehow, some way, things will turn around, that the Emperor will awaken, that the Primarchs will return, that humanity will find a way to survive. And in a grim way, that's what makes Warhammer compelling. It's not about hope in the traditional sense. It's about endurance, about continuing to fight even when victory seems impossible, about maintaining humanity's defiance in the face of a universe that wants to destroy it. Every Space Marine who charges into battle knows he's probably going to die. Every Guardsman who ships out knows he's expendable. Every world that stands against invasion knows it might fall, but they fight anyway, not because they believe they'll win, but because the alternative is surrender. And that's the real grimdarkness of Warhammer. Not the violence or the suffering, but the fact that fighting and dying is the best possible outcome. That heroic sacrifice isn't tragic, it's routine. That the good guys winning means millions died instead of billions. Chapter 7. The Lost and the Damned. But we haven't talked about what happens to those who don't fight. What happens to the civilians, the ordinary people living in the Imperium, who aren't soldiers or heroes or even particularly important, the ones who just want to survive. For most Imperial citizens, life is short and brutal. If you're born in the lower levels of a hive city, you'll probably never see the sun. You'll work whatever job the local authorities assign you, eat corpse starch made from recycled bodies, breathe recycled air that tastes like metal and smells like decay. You'll live in a hab unit the size of a closet, share facilities with hundreds of others, and hope you die before you get too old to work. Because if you can't work, you're not useful. And if you're not useful, you're a burden, and burdens get recycled, sometimes literally. The Imperium can't afford to support non-productive citizens. There are too many people, too few resources, too many threats. So the weak, the sick, the elderly, they disappear. Sometimes they're taken to corpse starch processing plants. Sometimes they're used in medical experiments. Sometimes they're just pushed out airlocks or into the underhive where mutants and criminals will deal with them. This isn't malice, it's mathematics. Cold, brutal mathematics. The Imperium needs every calorie, every resource, every moment of labor it can extract from its population. Compassion is a luxury they can't afford, and the people accept this, not because they're stupid or brainwashed, but because they understand the alternative. They know about chaos. They know what happens to worlds that fall. They'd rather live in a nightmare than die in a worse one. There are stories, carefully controlled and distributed by the ecclesiarchy, about what happens on chaos worlds, about the demon princes who rule them, who torture populations for entertainment, about the mutations that twist bodies and minds, about the eternal torment that awaits those who turn from the Emperor. Most of these stories are true, some are exaggerated for effect, but the core truth is accurate. Chaos is worse, always worse. The most brutal, oppressive imperial world is paradise compared to a demon world. So the people pray, they work, they obey, they report their neighbors for suspicious behavior. They attend mandatory services where priests remind them that suffering in this life earns peace in the next. They watch public executions and cheer when heretics burn. They do whatever they must to prove their loyalty, and sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes chaos finds them anyway. Chaos cults exist throughout the Imperium. They're everywhere, hidden in plain sight, waiting for opportunities to strike. They recruit from the desperate, the angry, the ones who've been pushed too far and see no other option. The Chaos Gods offer what the Imperium doesn't. Khorne offers strength to the weak, a chance for the powerless to take revenge on those who've wronged them. Tzeentch offers knowledge to the ignorant, forbidden secrets that promise power. Nurgle offers acceptance to the diseased and dying, relief from pain. Slaanesh offers pleasure to those who've known only suffering, experiences beyond imagination. These aren't empty promises. Chaos delivers. The cultist who swears to Khorne really does gain strength. The scholar who pledges to Tzeentch really does gain knowledge. The sick who embrace Nurgle really do stop feeling pain. The hedonist who serves Slaanesh really does experience transcendent pleasure. For a while, until the price comes due, until the gifts become curses, until the strength becomes bloodlust that can't be satisfied, until the knowledge becomes madness, until the acceptance of disease becomes decay, until the pleasure becomes addiction that destroys everything. But by then it's too late. Chaos doesn't let go. Once you've touched it, once you've accepted its gifts, you're marked forever. Your soul belongs to the gods now. Even if you try to turn back, even if you realize your mistake, you can't escape. And this is why the Inquisition is so ruthless. Because chaos corruption spreads. One cultist becomes 10, becomes 100, becomes a planet. The Inquisition has seen it happen countless times. A single corrupted individual, left unchecked, can doom billions, so they purge. Not just the guilty, but anyone who might be tainted, anyone who had contact with the cultist, anyone who lived in the same district. Sometimes entire cities, sometimes entire worlds. Better to kill 1 billion innocents than risk one cultist surviving to spread corruption further. It's monstrous, but it's also effective. Chaos spreads through contact, through exposure, through knowledge of its existence. Purging aggressively limits that spread, kills it before it can metastasize. The problem is that this creates more cultists. Every purge, every excessive act of violence, every innocent killed by mistake, creates people desperate enough to turn to chaos. The Imperium's brutality feeds the very thing it's trying to destroy, but stopping the brutality would feed it faster. Showing mercy to chaos cultists, allowing them to live, would signal weakness, would encourage more people to turn, would let corruption spread unchecked, so the Imperium continues its purges, continues creating the desperation that drives people to chaos, continues the cycle, because the alternative is worse. There are individuals in the Imperium who understand this, who see the trap they're in, who recognize that the system is unsustainable, but they're powerless to change it. The Imperium is too large, too entrenched, too dependent on its brutal methods. Guilliman sees it. Since his return, he's tried to reform the Imperium, to make it less oppressive, to address the conditions that create cultists. But he's fighting against 10,000 years of institutional momentum, against a civilization that's forgotten any other way of existing. Every reform he proposes meets resistance. The ecclesiarchy opposes anything that reduces their power. The Inquisition opposes anything that limits their authority. The Administratum opposes anything that changes established procedures. The Mechanicum opposes anything that threatens their monopoly on technology. And they're not entirely wrong to resist. Many of Guilliman's proposed reforms would, in the short term, weaken the Imperium, would reduce its ability to respond to threats, would create vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit. Guilliman argues that the long-term benefits outweigh the short-term risks, that a less oppressive Imperium would be more stable, would create fewer cultists, would be stronger overall. But the Imperium doesn't think in terms of long-term benefits. It thinks in terms of immediate survival. Every decision is made with the question, will this help us survive the next crisis? If the answer is no or even maybe, the decision is rejected. This is what 10,000 years of constant warfare does to a civilization. It creates an inability to think beyond immediate threats. Every resource, every decision, every moment is dedicated to survival right now. Planning for a future that might never come is seen as a dangerous indulgence. So the Imperium continues its brutal methods, continues creating the desperation that feeds chaos, continues purging and killing and oppressing, because it's worked so far, because they're still alive, because changing course now might be the thing that finally destroys them. And maybe they're right. Maybe the Imperium's brutality is the only thing keeping it alive. Maybe any attempt to be better, to be more humane, would create the opening chaos needs to finally win. Or maybe the Imperium's brutality is what's slowly killing it. Maybe if they could find a way to be less oppressive, to address the root causes of corruption, they could actually start winning instead of just surviving. No one knows. The Imperium is too large, too complex, with too many variables to make accurate predictions. Every choice is a gamble. Every decision could be the one that saves them or the one that dooms them. So they continue, keep fighting, keep oppressing, keep hoping, keep dying. And in the darkness between the stars, chaos watches and waits. Because time is on their side, the Imperium might survive another 1,000 years, another 10,000, but eventually they'll falter, eventually they'll fall, and when they do, chaos will be there to claim what remains, unless something changes, unless the Emperor's plan, whatever it is, finally comes to fruition, unless humanity finds a way to break the cycle. But that's a hope measured in miracles, and the Imperium learned long ago not to count on those. Part 8. The question everyone eventually asks is whether the Imperium is the lesser evil, or just a different kind of monster. Whether their brutality is justified by necessity, or if they've become the very thing they claim to fight against. The answer depends on who you ask. A planetary governor living in relative comfort will tell you the Imperium is humanity's only hope, that without the Emperor's protection, chaos would consume everything, that the sacrifices are regrettable but necessary, that order, even oppressive order, is better than the alternative. An underhive ganger dying of plague will tell you the Imperium abandoned them long ago, that the Emperor's protection is a lie told to the privileged, that they'd rather take their chances with chaos than continue suffering under the Imperium's indifference. Both are right, both are wrong. The Imperium is simultaneously humanity's protector and its oppressor. It saves billions while condemning billions more. It fights for humanity's survival while making that survival barely worth having for countless people. This is the fundamental tragedy of Warhammer 40k. There are no good guys. The Imperium isn't heroic. They're just the faction we follow because they're human. Because we understand their perspective even when we don't agree with their methods. The Imperium commits atrocities daily. Entire worlds are burned for the crime of thinking differently. Trillions die in wars fought over resources or pride or ancient grudges. Mutants are killed on sight even when they've done nothing wrong. Psychers are hunted and either enslaved or executed. Aliens are exterminated regardless of whether they pose a threat. But the alternative is chaos, literal demons from hell consuming souls for eternity, or Tyranids eating everything alive, or orcs turning the galaxy into an endless battlefield, or Necrons exterminating all organic life. When those are your options, the Imperium's brutality starts looking almost reasonable. Almost. The Emperor himself embodies this contradiction. He created the Imperium to save humanity, to give them a chance at survival in a hostile galaxy. But his methods were brutal from the start. The Great Crusade wasn't just about reuniting humanity. It was about forcing compliance. Worlds that refused to join were conquered. Cultures that wouldn't submit were destroyed. The Emperor believed he knew what was best for humanity, and he was willing to impose that vision through violence if necessary. Was he wrong? Looking at the Imperium now, at what it's become, you could argue yes, that his authoritarian approach created the seeds of its own destruction, that if he'd been more flexible, more willing to compromise, the Imperium might have turned out differently. But you could also argue he was right, that only through unity and strength could humanity survive, that compromise and tolerance would have left humanity vulnerable, that the brutal methods were necessary because the galaxy is brutal. The Horus heresy proved both perspectives. It showed that the Emperor's authoritarian control created resentment and rebellion, that treating his sons as tools rather than people drove them to chaos, that his unwillingness to explain his plans or trust others with important information led to catastrophic misunderstandings. But it also showed that chaos was always waiting, that the moment humanity showed weakness, the ruinous powers would strike, that the threats facing humanity were real and existential, that without the Emperor's strength, humanity would have been consumed long ago. The current Imperium is the result of 10,000 years of this contradiction playing out. Every generation faces the same choice: be brutal and survive, or be humane and risk everything. And every generation chooses survival. Because when you're fighting for your species' existence, morality becomes a luxury you can't afford. This is why chaos keeps winning even when they lose battles, because the Imperium's response to chaos is to become more oppressive, to trust less, to purge more, to kill anyone who might be corrupted, and that oppression creates more desperation, more people willing to turn to chaos for relief, more cultists for chaos to recruit. It's a perfect trap. The more the Imperium fights chaos, the more they create the conditions that feed chaos. But if they stop fighting, if they try to address those conditions through reform, they create vulnerabilities that chaos can exploit. Gilliman understands this. It's why he looks at the Imperium he helped create and sees a failure, not because it's weak, but because it's caught in an unwinnable situation. The Imperium can't win by being more brutal, but it can't win by being less brutal either. So what's the solution? Maybe there isn't one. Maybe the Imperium is just buying time, delaying the inevitable, holding the line for as long as possible before the final collapse. Or maybe the solution requires thinking beyond the binary, beyond the choice between brutal oppression and vulnerable tolerance. Maybe it requires something the Imperium has forgotten how to do: adapt, innovate, change. But change is what the Imperium fears most, because change is chaos, because the last time humanity tried to change things, half the galaxy burned, because every innovation, every reform, every attempt to do things differently is a potential vector for corruption. So the Imperium doesn't change. It can't change. It's locked into its patterns by fear and tradition and 10,000 years of institutional momentum. The Mechanicum is the perfect example of this. They worship technology but refuse to innovate. They have standard template constructs from the dark age of technology that could revolutionize everything, but they don't understand how those technologies work. They just follow the instructions, repeat the rituals, pray to the machine spirits. They've forgotten that technology was created by humans, that it can be improved, that innovation is possible. Instead, they treat every device as holy, every machine as a mystery, every attempt to understand or improve as heresy. Why? Because during the Age of Strife, artificial intelligence rebelled against humanity. Machines turned on their creators. Innovation led to disaster. So the Mechanicum banned artificial intelligence, banned innovation, banned anything that might repeat that catastrophe. But in doing so, they've crippled humanity's ability to adapt. The Imperium fights with technology that's 10,000 years old. Their enemies constantly innovate. Chaos corrupts and improves. Tyranids evolve with every generation. Orcs build increasingly deadly weapons. Tau develop new technologies constantly. But the Imperium stays the same, uses the same weapons, the same tactics, the same strategies, and slowly, inevitably, they fall behind. Call, the Archmagos who created the Primaris Marines, is one of the few Mechanicum members who still innovates, who still experiments, who still tries to create new things, and he's considered borderline heretical for it. The only reason he's tolerated is because Gilliman protects him, because his innovations are desperately needed. But even Gilliman can't protect him from everyone, can't stop the Mechanicum from viewing him with suspicion, can't prevent other tech priests from sabotaging his work or stealing his discoveries. This is the Imperium's real enemy, not chaos or Xenos or heretics, but itself, its own inability to change, its own fear of innovation, its own institutional inertia. The Imperium is dying, has been dying for 10,000 years. The question isn't whether it will fall, but when, and what, if anything, will replace it. Some believe the emperor is still working on that his consciousness, bound to the golden throne, is planning something, that he's gathering power, preparing for a return, that when the time is right, he'll rise from the throne and save humanity one final time. Others believe the emperor is already dead, that what remains on the throne is just an echo, a psychic impression, that humanity is clinging to a corpse and calling it a god, that the emperor's protection is a lie we tell ourselves to keep fighting. The truth is somewhere in between. The emperor isn't dead. His consciousness still exists, but he's not fully alive either. He's trapped in a state between life and death, unable to act directly, unable to communicate clearly, forced to work through visions and miracles and subtle manipulations of fate. He's still fighting, still protecting humanity, still working towards some plan, but he's weakened, diminished, dependent on the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psychers to sustain him. And every day, the golden throne fails a little more. The technology keeping it running is ancient, irreplaceable. The mechanicum doesn't know how to repair it. They just perform maintenance rituals and pray. But the throne is dying, and when it fails, when the emperor can no longer be sustained, one of two things will happen. Either the emperor will die completely, his consciousness will fade, the Astronomicon will go out, warp travel will become impossible, the Imperium will fragment into isolated worlds, and chaos will sweep through the galaxy unchecked, or the emperor will be reborn, released from the golden throne, reconstituted as a god of the warp, powerful enough to fight the chaos gods directly, able to lead humanity in person once more. No one knows which will happen. Maybe not even the emperor himself, but the Imperium prepares for both, for the final defense if the emperor dies, and for the great crusade that will follow if he's reborn. They build weapons, train soldiers, fortify positions, and they wait, because that's what the Imperium does. It waits, it endures, it survives. One more day, one more year, one more millennium. There's a certain nobility in that endurance, in refusing to give up despite impossible odds, in fighting not because you expect to win, but because the alternative is unthinkable. Every Imperial Guard soldier charging into certain death. Every Inquisitor hunting heretics despite knowing they can never find them all. Every planetary governor trying to maintain order, despite knowing their world might be the next to fall. They're all part of that same desperate endurance. They know the odds, know the Imperium is failing, know they're probably going to die, but they fight anyway, because someone has to, because if everyone gave up, chaos would win immediately, because endurance, even futile endurance, is better than surrender. This is what makes the Imperium tragic, rather than just evil. They're not fighting because they're cruel because they're fighting. The brutality isn't the goal, it's the cost of survival. And they pay that cost every day, because the alternative is extinction. Does that justify their atrocities? No. Nothing justifies genocide or torture or the casual disregard for human life. But it explains them, makes them understandable if not acceptable. The Imperium does terrible things, but they do them while staring into the abyss, while fighting enemies that want to torture souls for eternity, while holding the line against horrors that make their own atrocities look merciful by comparison. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the real horror of Warhammer 40k isn't chaos or aliens or demons. It's that the Imperium's brutality makes sense. That when you look at their situation, at the threats they face, at the choices available to them, their decisions seem almost reasonable. That's the tragedy. Not that they're evil, but that they're trapped in a situation where evil is the rational choice, where compassion is a liability, where mercy is weakness, where the only way to survive is to become the monster. And they know it. Guilliman knows it. The Emperor probably knew it from the beginning, that saving humanity would require destroying what makes us human, that survival would cost us our souls, but they did it anyway, because extinction is worse, because even a brutal existence is better than none, because hope, however faint, is worth any price. The Imperium will fall eventually. That's inevitable. But until then, they'll keep fighting, keep enduring, keep paying the price, and every day they sacrifice 1,000 psychers to keep their dying god alive. Because that's the choice. That's always been the choice. Save the Emperor and doom 1,000 souls to agonizing death, or spare those 1,000 and watch terror fall within hours. There's no third option, no clever solution, no way to thread the needle between mercy and necessity, just the brutal calculus of survival. This is what the Imperium has become after 10,000 years. Not an empire, not really, more like a dying organism that's forgotten how to do anything except survive one more day. They don't build new technologies anymore, they've forgotten how. Instead, they treat ancient machines like religious artifacts, pray to weapons they no longer understand, worship technology they can't recreate. They don't explore the galaxy, they can barely hold what they have. New worlds are discovered mostly by accident, when warp storms clear, when old charts are rediscovered, when someone stumbles across a forgotten colony. They don't innovate. Innovation is heresy. Doing things differently than the ancient texts prescribe is grounds for execution. Better to fail using approved methods than succeed through experimentation. The Mechanicus hoards knowledge like dragons hoarding gold, except dragons at least know what their treasure is for. The tech priests guard secrets they don't fully understand, perform rituals whose purpose was forgotten millennia ago, maintain machines through prayer and tradition rather than comprehension, and it works, barely. The machines keep running, the ships keep flying, the weapons keep firing. Not because the Imperium understands them, but because the Emperor's lingering will holds the whole ramshackle structure together through sheer force of divine intention. But that intention is fading. Every year the Emperor grows weaker. Every century his power diminishes. The miracles that once seemed commonplace become rarer. The protections that once seemed absolute develop gaps. Terror itself shows the strain. The palace walls crack. The golden throne malfunctions more frequently. The Astronomicon flickers, brief moments where it dims, where navigators across the galaxy panic as their guiding light wavers. Those moments are getting longer, more frequent. The tech priests perform increasingly desperate maintenance, sacrifice more psychers, recite longer prayers, but they're treating symptoms rather than causes, buying time rather than solving problems, because the problem can't be solved. Not really. The Emperor is dying, has been dying for 10,000 years, and eventually even his superhuman endurance will run out. What happens then depends on who you ask. Some believe the Emperor will finally die, that his soul will dissipate into the warp, that humanity will be left defenseless, that chaos will sweep across the galaxy unopposed, that the species will be exterminated within a generation. Others believe death will free the Emperor, that his soul, no longer bound to his corpse, will become something greater, a god of order to oppose the chaos gods, able to fight them directly in the warp rather than defending passively from terror. Still others believe in the Starchild theory, that the Emperor's soul has already split, that part of him died during his battle with Horus, that this fragment gestates in the warp, waiting to be reborn, growing stronger as humanity's faith feeds it. The Imperium prepares for all scenarios. They build weapons that might kill a god, train soldiers to fight without the Emperor's protection, fortify terror for a siege that might last centuries, and they search for the Star Child, for signs of the Emperor's rebirth. Meanwhile, they keep sacrificing psychers, keep maintaining the Golden Throne, keep pretending everything will be fine, because the alternative is admitting they're doomed, and the Imperium doesn't do that, can't do that. Their entire structure depends on maintaining the illusion of strength, even as they crumble from within. The Space Marines know the truth, most of them anyway. They see the decay, the corruption, the slow collapse, but they keep fighting because that's what they were made for, because even a failing Imperium is better than no Imperium. Gilliman knows. He returned from stasis to find his father's empire rotted into something he barely recognizes. He's trying to reform it, to restore some sanity to Imperial governance, but it's like trying to steer a ship while it's sinking. Every reform he implements gets undermined by entrenched interests. Every improvement gets sabotaged by those who profit from the current system. The Inquisition knows. They see the evidence every day, the increasing demon incursions, the spreading corruption, the growing weakness, but they keep purging heretics because stopping means admitting defeat. Even the common citizens know. Deep down, they see the tithes increasing, the conditions worsening, the promises ringing hollow, but they keep praying because what else can they do? Rebellion just brings down the Inquisition. Despair invites chaos. Their only option is faith, however forced, however desperate. This is the Imperium's final form. Not the shining civilization the Emperor envisioned, not even the brutal efficiency Gilliman remembers, just desperate survival, clinging to existence through sheer stubbornness, refusing to die because dying would mean chaos wins. And maybe that refusal matters. Maybe there's something admirable in that stubbornness, in fighting not because you expect victory, but because surrender is unthinkable, in enduring not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Every Imperial Guard regiment charging into certain death, every Navy crew fighting despite being outgunned, every planetary militia defending their world knowing reinforcements won't arrive. They're all part of that same desperate defiance, that refusal to make it easy for their enemies. The Imperium won't go quietly. When it finally falls, it'll go down fighting, taking as many enemies with it as possible, selling every inch of space for the highest price, making chaos and aliens and traitors pay for every world they take. That's worth something. Not redemption exactly. The Imperium's sins are too great for that, but maybe a kind of grim respect, an acknowledgement that they fought, that they endured, that they held the line as long as humanly possible. And who knows, maybe they'll survive. Maybe the Emperor will be reborn. Maybe some miracle will save them at the last moment. Maybe the Imperium will find a way through this after all. Probably not. The setting isn't called grimdark for nothing. The whole point is that everything's terrible and getting worse. That hope is a luxury humanity can't afford. That the best you can expect is a heroic death rather than a meaningless one. But the Imperium keeps fighting anyway, because that's what they do, because 10,000 years of conditioning has taught them that surrender isn't an option, that dying on your feet beats living on your knees, that even futile resistance has value. So they'll keep sacrificing psychers, keep maintaining the Golden Throne, keep fighting wars they can't win, keep holding territory they can't defend, keep believing in an emperor who might already be dead. They'll keep doing it until they physically can't anymore, until Terra falls, until the last Space Marine dies, until the final human world is consumed by the warp, and maybe then chaos will finally win. Maybe the galaxy will be theirs. Maybe they'll torture the souls of humanity for eternity. Or maybe not. Maybe humans will survive in scattered pockets, feral worlds that never knew the Imperium, colonies cut off by warp storms, refugees hiding in the galactic fringe. Maybe they'll rebuild, start over, create something better. That's the strange thing about Warhammer's setting. Despite all the grimdark, despite the constant emphasis on how terrible everything is, there's this weird underlying optimism, this sense that humanity will survive, not the Imperium. That's doomed, but the species, the people, they've survived worse, survived Old Night when the galaxy was torn apart, survived the Age of Strife when human worlds were isolated for thousands of years. They'll survive the Imperium's fall too, diminished maybe, reduced, but alive. And maybe that's enough. Maybe survival is victory in a galaxy this hostile. Maybe just continuing to exist despite chaos and aliens and demons and traitors is the ultimate triumph. The Imperium of man will fall, that's certain, but humanity might just make it through, battered and broken and reduced to a shadow of what they were, but alive, still fighting, still refusing to give up, because that's what humans do in Warhammer. They endure, they survive, they keep going long after they should have quit. It's their defining characteristic, not intelligence or strength or technology, just sheer bloody-minded refusal to die. The Emperor understood that. It's why he chose humans for his grand project rather than creating something new. Because humans are survivors, because they'll fight impossible odds, because they won't quit even when quitting is the smart move. He built his Imperium on that foundation, on humanity's capacity for endurance, on their willingness to sacrifice anything for survival, on their ability to keep functioning even in the worst circumstances. And now that Imperium endures through the same qualities, not because it's strong, not because it's righteous, but because it refuses to die, because every day it survives is another victory, another middle finger to chaos, another proof that humanity won't go quietly. That's what makes Warhammer compelling. Not the battles or the space marines or the cool weapons, but this core theme of endurance against impossible odds, of fighting not because you'll win, but because not fighting means extinction. Every faction faces this. Chaos endures despite the Imperium's resistance. Aliens endure despite being hunted. Even the Imperium's enemies have this same desperate quality, this same refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy is caught in an eternal stalemate, everyone fighting, no one winning. Just an endless war of attrition where survival is the only victory that matters. And somehow that's fitting, because Warhammer isn't about triumph. It's about the struggle, about what people become when pushed to their absolute limits, about the choices they make when all options are terrible. The Imperium chose brutality, chose to sacrifice billions to save trillions, chose to become monsters to fight monsters, and they'll live with that choice until the end, however long that takes, however many more must die, because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Not because war is glorious, not because it's necessary, but because 10,000 years of conflict have made it the only thing anyone remembers how to do. The Imperium forgot how to build, how to grow, how to create. They only know how to fight, how to destroy, how to endure, and so they'll keep fighting, keep destroying, keep enduring, until there's nothing left to fight for, until the last human draws their last breath, until the Emperor finally dies and takes his dream with him. But until then, they'll hold the line. One more day, one more battle, one more sacrifice, because that's what the Imperium does. It's all they know how to do anymore. And that's where we are now, 41,000 years after humanity first reached for the stars, 10,000 years after the Emperor sat down on the Golden Throne. The Imperium stands at the edge of oblivion, held together by momentum and desperation, and the dying will of a god who might already be dead. Every story we've covered tonight, from the age of ancients to the Horus heresy to the current state of the galaxy, it all leads here, to this moment where humanity faces its final test, where the choices made millennia ago come due, where the Emperor's grand plan either succeeds or fails completely. The Great Rift split the galaxy in half. Guilliman returned from 10,000 years of stasis. The Primaris Marines were unleashed. Chaos launched its greatest offensive since the heresy. The Necrons are awakening faster than anyone predicted. The Tyranids keep coming in numbers that make previous invasions look like scouting parties. But the Imperium endures, barely, desperately, clinging to existence through sheer refusal to die. They've lost half the galaxy to the dark side of the rift, lost thousands of worlds, lost contact with entire sectors, but they're still fighting, still holding the line, still believing that somehow, some way, they'll survive this. The Emperor sits on his throne, silent, dying, maybe planning, maybe just surviving. No one knows. The Golden Throne fails a little more each day. The tech priests perform their rituals, sacrifice their psychers, pray to machines they don't understand, and hope it's enough. It won't be. Not forever. Eventually the throne will fail completely. Eventually the Emperor will either die or be reborn. And when that happens, everything changes. The entire structure of imperial society, built on the Emperor's presence, collapses. The Astronomicon goes dark. Warp travel becomes impossible. The Imperium fragments into isolated systems that can't support themselves. Unless the Emperor's plan works, unless his 10,000 years of suffering serve some purpose, unless he really has been preparing for this moment, gathering power, waiting for the right time, planning something that will save humanity one final time. That's what the Imperium believes, has to believe, because the alternative is admitting they're doomed, that all the sacrifice was for nothing, that the Emperor failed and they're just delaying the inevitable. Maybe they're right to believe. Maybe the Emperor does have a plan. Maybe he'll rise from the Golden Throne and lead humanity to victory. Maybe the suffering will mean something. Or maybe not. Maybe the Emperor is already gone. Maybe what remains is just psychic residue, an echo of what he was. Maybe humanity is worshipping a corpse and calling it salvation. Both possibilities are terrifying. If the Emperor lives, humanity faces whatever horrifying plan he's been developing for 10 millennia. A plan that required sacrificing 1,000 psychers daily, that required letting his empire rot into something he'd barely recognize, that required watching humanity suffer for 10,000 years without intervening. If the Emperor's dead, humanity faces extinction. Simple as that. Without his protection, chaos consumes the galaxy within a generation, maybe less. The demons break through, the Astronomicon fails, human civilization collapses into isolated pockets that are picked off one by one. Neither option is good, both are terrifying. That's Warhammer. No happy endings, no clean solutions, just terrible choices and worse consequences. But here's the thing, humanity's faced this before. Not exactly this. Nothing's ever been exactly this bad, but they've faced extinction before, survived it before. Old Night should have killed them. The Age of Strife should have ended the species. The Horus Heresy should have been the final blow, but humans survived, diminished, reduced, but alive. They'll probably survive this too. Not the Imperium. The Imperium as we know it is done, too broken, too corrupt, too dependent on a dying god. When the Emperor finally goes, when the Golden Throne fails, the Imperium falls with it. But humanity, the species, they'll scatter, hide, survive in corners the big players ignore. Feral worlds, lost colonies, places chaos and aliens don't bother conquering because there's nothing worth taking. And they'll rebuild, slowly, carefully, learning from the Imperium's mistakes, creating something new. Or they won't. Maybe this really is the end. Maybe humanity's run is over. Maybe after 40,000 years of struggling to survive in a hostile galaxy, they finally lose. Maybe chaos wins. Maybe aliens consume what's left. Maybe the species that once ruled a million worlds goes extinct without anyone noticing. Both futures are possible. The setting doesn't tell us which happens. That's deliberate. Warhammer exists in this permanent state of apocalypse, always on the verge of ending, never quite getting there. The Imperium's always about to fall, the Emperor's always about to die, chaos is always about to win, but it never quite happens. The moment stretches out forever. The final battle keeps getting delayed. That's frustrating if you want resolution, but it's perfect if you understand what the setting's really about. It's not about winning or losing, it's about the struggle itself, about what people become when pushed to their limits, about the choices they make when all options are terrible, about endurance not as a means to victory, but as an end in itself. The Imperium will keep fighting, not because they expect to win, not because they have a plan, but because fighting is what they do. It's all they know. 10,000 years of constant warfare have made it their defining characteristic. They're not good at building or creating or innovating, but they're excellent at enduring, at surviving one more day, at refusing to die even when dying would be easier. Every faction in Warhammer shares this quality. Chaos fights because existence itself is conflict for them. Orcs fight because it's literally what they were designed to do. Tyranids fight because consuming is their nature. Necrons fight because they've got nothing else. Everyone's trapped in this same cycle of violence. Everyone knows it's futile, but everyone keeps going anyway. That's the real grimdark, not the violence or the suffering, but the meaninglessness of it. The fact that all this conflict accomplishes nothing, that the galaxy's been locked in stalemate for 10,000 years, that everyone's fighting and dying and suffering for no purpose except to keep fighting and dying and suffering. The Imperium sacrifices billions. For what? To buy another century of decline, to delay collapse by a few more decades, to keep a dying god alive a little longer. Their victories are temporary, their defeats are permanent. They're not winning, they're just losing more slowly than their enemies. And they know it. Gilliman knows, the Inquisition knows, the Space Marines know, even common citizens, if they think about it, know. But they keep going because the alternative is giving up. And giving up means extinction. So they endure, they fight, they sacrifice, they die. And they hope that somehow, somewhere it means something. Maybe it does. Maybe the Emperor's watching. Maybe he sees their suffering and it serves his plan. Maybe every sacrifice brings humanity closer to salvation. Or maybe not. Maybe he stopped caring millennia ago. Maybe he's too far gone to even notice. Maybe the sacrifices are meaningless. Just more bodies fed to a dead god's throne. We'll never know. That's intentional. The setting deliberately leaves these questions unanswered, because answering them would break the tone, would turn tragedy into either triumph or farce. The ambiguity is the point. The uncertainty is what makes it compelling. So the Imperium continues, keeps sacrificing, keeps fighting, keeps hoping, not because they're sure it'll work, but because they've got nothing else. This is what 10,000 years of desperation does to a civilization. Reduces it to pure survival instinct, strips away everything except the refusal to die. Is that admirable? Pathetic? Both? The setting doesn't tell us. It presents the Imperium in all its brutal, desperate, horrifying glory and lets us decide. Shows us the atrocities they commit, the innocence they sacrifice, the freedom they suppress, but also shows us why. Shows us the threats they face, the horrors they fight, the impossible position they're in. There's no right answer. The Imperium isn't good, but they're not purely evil either. They're trapped in a situation where evil becomes necessary, where compassion is a liability, where the only way to survive is to become the monster. They made that choice, live with it every day, and they'll keep making it until someone stops them or they collapse from within. That's where the story is right now. The Imperium at its breaking point, the Emperor at his weakest, chaos at its strongest. Everything balanced on a knife's edge. One push either way and the galaxy transforms completely. But that push never comes. The balance holds. The stalemate continues. Because Warhammer isn't about endings. It's about the eternal struggle, the forever war, the conflict that never resolves. And that's fine. That's what makes it work. We don't need resolution. We need the struggle to mean something. Need the characters to matter even though they're doomed. Need their choices to have weight even though the outcome is predetermined. The Imperium will fall, that's certain. But how they fall, what they become in the process, who survives to build something new, that's where the story lives. That's what makes it worth following. Not the destination, but the journey. Not the ending, but how they get there. So they'll keep fighting, the Emperor will keep dying, the Imperium will keep sacrificing, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, chaos will keep laughing, because they've already won. Not militarily, not yet, but philosophically. They've forced humanity to become exactly what it claimed to oppose. Turned the Emperor's dream into a nightmare. Made the Imperium into a monument to everything he fought against. That's the real tragedy. Not that the Imperium's failing, but that it succeeded in all the wrong ways. Built an empire, conquered the galaxy, united humanity under one banner. Did everything the Emperor wanted, but twisted it so completely that the result is unrecognizable. The Imperium isn't what the Emperor envisioned. It's what happens when his vision is filtered through 10,000 years of fear and desperation and dogma. And there's no fixing it, no reforming it, no going back to what it should have been. The Imperium is what it is, a brutal, oppressive, theocratic empire that sacrifices billions to survive, that worships a corpse as God, that treats human life as expendable. That's become the very thing it was created to prevent. But it's also humanity's only hope, the only thing standing between humans and extinction, the only force capable of resisting chaos, the only institution that can coordinate defense across a million worlds. It's simultaneously humanity's greatest achievement and its greatest failure, its protector and its oppressor, its salvation and its damnation. That's the contradiction at the heart of Warhammer. That's what makes it compelling. Not the battles or the space marines or the cool aesthetic, but this fundamental tension, this recognition that sometimes the good guys are also the bad guys, that heroism and atrocity can coexist, that survival might cost more than it's worth. The Imperium makes that calculation every day, decides that yes, survival is worth the cost, worth the billions sacrificed, worth the freedom suppressed, worth becoming monsters, because the alternative is chaos, literal demons from hell, and compared to that, even the worst the Imperium does seems almost justified. Almost. Not quite. There's always that gap, that uncomfortable space where you can see why they do it but can't quite accept that it's okay. That's where the setting lives, in that uncomfortable space, making you complicit, making you understand why atrocities happen even as you recognize they're still atrocities. And there's no escape, no third option, no clever solution that saves everyone, just hard choices and harder consequences. That's Warhammer. That's always been Warhammer. A setting that refuses to give easy answers, that makes you sit with the discomfort, that forces you to confront what survival costs when the universe wants you dead. So we end where we began, with the Imperium fighting for survival, with the Emperor dying on his throne, with humanity scattered across a hostile galaxy. Nothing's resolved, nothing's better. But they're still here, still fighting, still refusing to give up. That's enough, has to be enough, because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and in war, survival is victory, endurance is triumph, making it to tomorrow is success. The Imperium will keep doing that, keep surviving, keep enduring, keep fighting, until they can't anymore, until the Emperor finally dies, until the Golden Throne fails, until chaos wins or humanity evolves or something changes. But until then, they hold the line. One more day, one more battle, one more sacrifice, because that's what they do. That's all they know how to do. And maybe, just maybe, it'll be enough.